This is still under your module 4 class, Life Abroad and Higher Education of our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal. Throughout the week, we have been discussing when and where our national hero had been traveling or had traveled for his studies. And during his travels, he met lots of people and friends who eventually became friends, and one of those actually was significant in the publication of his one of two novels. Okay, so later on we are going to find out how he was able to publish his novel despite the fact that he was already running out of budget. Okay, so we stopped here in Great Britain, Paris, and Spain. Please take note of the important details, the names of the ships, names of the captains perhaps, and the people who he met during these travels. Okay, so on board the ship City of Rome, Rizal sailed for Liverpool on May 16, 1888 and arrived there on May 24. The 6th day after, he reached London and stayed briefly at Don Antonio Marejador's house. He then boarded at the Beckett residence, where he was lovingly served by Gertrude, the daughter of his landlord. Gertrude actually is an addition to the many ladies that fell in love with Rizal class. Okay. So in June 1888, Rizal made friends with Dr. Reinhold Rost and his family. Expert in Malayan language, Rost had in his house a good Filipiniana library. Our national hero was described by Rost as a pearl of a man, or una perla de hombre. When you call someone a pearl of a man, what do you usually mean? We can get its implication or meaning through looking into the word pearl. What is a pearl? It's something that is valuable or precious. And when it comes to its color, it's something that is pure or fair. And that is our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal, who is of great value, who is such a precious man, and who is someone who is pure. Okay, so in London, Rizal manually copied and annotated Morga's Successus de las Islas Filipinas, a rare book available in the British Museum. He also became the honorary president of the Patriotic Society Asociación La Solidaridad, or Solidaridad Association, and wrote articles for the La Solidaridad. In his 10-month stay in London, he had short visits in Paris, Madrid, and Barcelona. And in Spain, he met Marcelo H. Del Pilar for the first time. Del Pilar was one of the renowned members of the propaganda movement, along with Graciano Lopez Jaena, publisher of La Solidaridad, and Mariano Ponce and Rizal. Okay, so what we have so far discussed, class, are the countries he had been for his studies, but we were already done with it. We already know the degrees he was able to earn. But aside from his studies, he also went abroad for some reasons, such as he was he was advised to go there or leave the country because the Spaniards are eyeing on him already, and they're already aware of the novels or the activities or the movements or the groups that Rizal is forming against them. In here, in Spain, we have La Solidaridad. It's actually a publication, and he wrote articles there. He used pen names, and what is the importance of pen name? Once again, authors usually hide behind pen names to protect themselves from any harm, especially if the articles they wrote are sensitive or something that would cause harm to them, worst, cause them death. And what are these two pen names? Okay, we'll find out later. He also met important people here. We have Marcelo del Pilar, Graciano Lopez Jaina, the publisher of La Solidaridad, Mariano Ponce, and Rizal. So these are the members of the propaganda movement class. We have Graciano Lopez Jaina, Mariano Ponce, and Rizal. Also, Del Pilar. Okay, so propaganda was a patriotic socio-political organization founded in 1872 by Filipinos who had settled in Europe. Its members were mainly the Filipino liberals exiled in 1872 and the Filipino students studying in Europe. Okay, as I've mentioned a while back, Rizal stay in abroad does not only pertain to his studies, but one of the main reasons why he stayed abroad was because he was exiled, or he was sent there, or he was asked to leave the country. And here in Europe, he was able to form a movement along with other Filipinos. Okay, members here are all Filipinos, mostly exiles like him, and Filipino students studying that time in Europe. Okay, he also considered a cultural and literary organization. The propaganda had principal publication La Solidaridad. Okay, so the the propaganda is a movement, and they have a publication, and this publication is called La Solidaridad. When we say publication, if we have newspaper publications now, we also had La Solidaridad before. So the propaganda primarily aimed to bring to Spain's attention the real needs of its colony, the Philippines. Among many other things, the propagandists specifically advocated the recognition of the Philippines as a province of Spain and its Philippines representation in the Spanish Parliament, or the Cortes Generales. Before I have laid out to you the summary of the misdeeds or the evils of the Spanish government against the Filipino people, I think I've laid out 11, and one of these 11 pertains to the no Filipino representation in Spanish Cortes, meaning there was no Filipino who was in position during this time, and so there was no justice at all. Because there was no justice, there was no equality. Because, for example, if there are two people, one Spanish and one Filipino, involved in a criminal case, who do you think would be favored and who do you think would be persecuted? Of course, the government, whose members are Spaniards, will favor their fellow Spaniard and will instead persecute the Filipino even if he was not the one who committed the crime, for instance. So there was no justice, there was no equality. In fact, there were prejudices and inequality. They're all favoring their fellow citizen. Okay, letter B, the secularization of the Philippine parishes and clergy, the equality between the Spanish and the Filipino, which did not happen because all the Spaniards or the Spanish people take Filipinos as their subordinates. Okay, especially in entering government service. Letter D, the establishment of government-funded schools not run by the friars. So I've already told you about this, that schools before were run not by the government but by the friars. It's ironic and downright wrong. Can you imagine friars serving as, how do we call our educational leaders? We have deans, chancellors, directors, principals, and can you imagine friars taking the role of one of those I've mentioned? There's a mismatch and they're not fit for the role. Okay, the abolition of the polo, forced labor, and vandala. Here in forced labor class, all 18 years old up to 60 years old were tasked by the government to work for them, and the work here usually is construction. So can you imagine a 60-year-old doing construction, mabigat na trabaho, they were not paid, and they do this for 45 days in a year without any compensation. And there were accounts or reports of deaths because even if a person is not yet in his legal age or not yet an 18-year-old man, he was already being dragged into this forced labor. Same is true with even if an old man is already beyond his 60, he will still be asked to do tasks for the government. Okay. Another, we have forced sale of local products to the government. Our farmers before, sila yung nagtanim pero hindi sila yung nakikinabang sa pinaghirapan nila. Persahang kinukuha ng gobyerno. And the recognition of human rights and freedom, especially the freedoms of speech and association. Okay, before, when you express your sentiments over the Spanish government, it's either you will be exiled or you will be killed. But here in the propaganda movement, the members here are very brave to lay out these, we can say, proposals or expression of sentiments to the Spanish government, but obviously this failed and eventually led to, instead of a diplomatic dealings, they ended up with revolution because the Spanish government did not listen to them. Okay, so seemingly advocated racial or cultural integration, the propaganda movement is thus branded as assimilationist. In anthropology and sociology, assimilation is the process whereby individuals or groups of differing ethnic heritage are absorbed into the dominant culture of a society. The process of assimilating involves taking on the traits of the dominant culture, example colonizer, and in our case, the dominant culture here in the Philippines was the Spanish. Become socially indistinguishable from the other members of the society. So contextually, the assimilationist stand in Rizal's time refers mainly to the advocacy to have the Philippines be treated as one of Spain's provinces instead of being branded or tagged as subordinate or a colony. So Rizal and Del Pilar are said to have later abandoned this assimilationist stand, although this is questioned by many historians, especially those who claim that either Rizal or Del Pilar was even anti-revolutionary. In some sure ways, nonetheless, both Rizal and Del Pilar inspired the establishment and mission of Andres Bonifacio's Revolutionary Society or the Katipunan. Rizal is actually the very person who advocated for diplomacy class as evidenced by his work. He used his mighty pen, his two novels, instead of waging war or instead of paggamit ng dangdahas o ng itak during this time. What he used instead was his pen. Ito actually yung punto karaniwan sa debate na kung sino ba ang deserving of the title national hero, someone who used his pen or someone who used his attack. Pero in the end, Rizal also sacrificed his life because even if he did not use attack, he was still sentenced to death because of his two novels, unearthing the evil deeds of the Spaniards towards the Filipino people. Okay, so yun class ay sa anong bansa ulit? Sa Britain, Paris, and Spain. Now we move on to France naman. Leaving London for good, he went to Paris in March 1889. He shortly lived in the house of a friend, Valentin Ventura, before transferring to a little room where he had as roommates two Filipinos, one of whom was Jose Albert, a student from Manila. In Paris, Rizal frequented the Bibliothèque Nationale working on his annotation of the Successus. He spent his spare hours in the houses of friends like Juan Luna and his wife Paz Pardo de Tavera. Rizal witnessed the Universal Exposition of Paris, having as its greatest attraction the Eiffel Tower. Rizal formed the Kidnap Club, a temporary social club which brought together Filipinos witnessing the exposition. He also organized the Indios Bravos, an association which envisioned Filipinos being recognized for their admirable skills in many fields. So Rizal likewise formed the mysterious Redemption de los Malayos, Redemption of the Malays, which aimed to propagate useful knowledge. So in Paris, Rizal also finished and published his annotation of the successes. So the important detail or event which existed during his stay in Paris, France class was his publication of his annotation to the successus. So, yun yung pinaka nagawa niya dito sa France. And another important detail here is that he met Valentin Ventura. Who is Valentin Ventura class? We'll find out here. I think so, no, not in Belgium, pero malapit na because Valentin Ventura class is a very important person in the life of Rizal. We'll find out later. Okay, Belgium muna tayo. After celebrating the Yuletide season in Paris in 1889, Rizal shortly visited London for the last time. With Jose Albert, Rizal left Paris for Brussels on January 28, 1890. Who is Jose Albert again? Ito yung naging roommate niya at estudyante ito. So the two stayed in a boarding house administered by the Jacobi sisters. We have Suzanne and Marie, where Rizal met and had a transitory affair with another, Suzanne, also called Petite, the niece of his landladies. Suzanne is not a famous lady or woman with whom Rizal was associated. Kasi ang mga alam natin, sina Leonor Rivera, Josephine Bracken, Miss L, O.C. San, yung Japanese girl. Etong si Suzanne, hindi naman natin siya naririnig, nakilala niya lang sa Belgium sa isang boarding house. Okay, so in Belgium, Rizal busied himself with writing the Fili and contributing for La Solidaridad. Again, La Solidaridad is a publication of the propaganda movement. Okay, itong La Solidaridad na ito, sumusulat si Rizal ng iba't ibang artikulo at ang ginamit niyang mga pen name ay Dimasalang at Laonglaan. Dalawang pen name ang ginamit niya dito. Again, the primary reason of authors for using pen names or hiding behind pen names is to protect themselves, protect their lives from any possible danger out of exposing truths or observations. Yan. Yung mga observations nila sa kung anong nangyayari around them, society, ayan, sinusulat nila. At syempre kapag nabasa ng mga pinapatungkulan nila, tinutukoy nila, it will cause harm to them. Okay, worse death. Okay, when he heard the news that the Calamba agrarian trouble was getting worse, Rizal decided to go home, but Pasiano told him through a letter that they lost the court case against the Dominicans in the Philippines, and they intended to bring the case to Madrid. This prompted Jose to go to Madrid instead to look for a lawyer and influential people who would defend the Calamba tenants. So yung pamilya ni Rizal class, pinaglalaban actually yung Calamba tenants. Sila ay taga Calamba. Pinaglalaban nila ang mga tao doon mula sa mga Dominicans na kumakamkam ng kanilang mga lupain. Instead of going home, Rizal decided to go to Madrid para maghanap ng pwedeng tumulong sa kanya na isang abogado at isang maimpluwensyang tao or pamilya na perhaps tutulong sa kanya sa kung anong paraan, economically. Okay, so let's find out kung anong nangyari dito sa Madrid. Rizal traveled to Madrid in August 1890 along with his lawyer Marcelo H. Del Pilar. Okay, so si Marcelo H. Del Pilar yung natagpuan niya na tumayong lawyer nila. He tried to seek justice for his family but could not find any influential Spaniard who could help them. Pero unfortunately, wala siyang nahanap na maimpluwensyang Espanyol na pwedeng tumulong sa kanila. Okay, in 1890, Rizal also met in Madrid the Filipino student Adalberto Evangelista. Perhaps sensing his potential, Rizal counseled Evangelista to take engineering in Belgium. Upon Rizal's advice, Evangelista thus matriculated at the University of Ghent, one of the world's leading engineering schools then. Okay, so si Rizal, kung we will try to infer from what we are reading, Rizal is also capable of discerning potentials from a student or from a man. Di ba ganun naman ang mga magagaling na tao? Kaya nilang makita kung saan magaling ang isang tao. And so, nung nakita niya yun kay Adalberto, pinayuhan niya na yung skills mo na babagay o nararapat sa ganito, kaya dito ka mag-enroll. At sumunod naman, etong si Adalberto, and then ending, he was very happy and was very grateful to Rizal kasi dito nga siya nag-succeed sa engineering. Ito yun, no? Rizal's suggestion proved fruitful as Evangelista later finished civil engineering and architecture with highest honors. So some European companies offered him rewarding positions, but he turned them down for wanting to serve his country instead. Okay, so after graduation, syempre dahil siyang pinakamagaling or graduate siya with highest honors, marami ang nag-offer sa kanya kay Adalberto, pero tinanggihan niya lahat yon kasi mas pinili niya or mas gusto niya na pagsilbihan yung kanyang bansa. Okay, so that is it for Adalberto. Meron lang tayong mga na-encounter dito na iba't ibang mga importanteng pangyayari sa buhay ni Rizal abroad. Okay, not only about him, pero how he was also able to be of help to people, to other people. Okay, Rizal encountered many adversities and tribulations in Madrid. He heard that his family was forced to leave their land in Calamba, and some family members were even deported to far places. Ayan na, ito na yung kung paano gipitin ng mga Espanyol ang pamilya ni Rizal. Nabanggit ko na sa inyo dati na hindi lang si Rizal yung ginigipit nila nung nalaman nila kung yung mga sinusulat at pinaplano ni Rizal. Ginipit na rin nila ang kanyang pamilya. So, naikwento ko na sa inyo yung kung paano ikinulong yung kanyang nanay kahit walang kasalanan. Tapos yung brother-in-law niya na hindi tinanggap sa simbahan at hindi pinayagan na magdaos ng misa para sa kanya. Brother-in-law niya napatay na. Ang nire-request lang ay magkaroon ng misa at maipalibing ng maayos, pero tinanggihan ng isang simbahan. Can you imagine that? An institution or a church teaching teaching the works of Christ, of God, tapos natanggihan ng isang bangkay. Okay. One day, dito, saan tayo? Sa Madrid to class ha? One day, Rizal challenged his friend Antonio Luna to a duel when he, Luna, being unsuccessful in seeking Nelly Bausted's love, gave negative comments on the lady. I thought this is funny kasi si Nelly Bausted, isa na namang babae na nalink kay Rizal. Si Nelly, may gusto siya kay Rizal at niligawan siya ni Antonio Luna, pero unrequited yung love ni Antonio Luna. Ibig sabihin, hindi bumalik sa kanyang admiration. He admired Nelly Bausted but Nelly Bausted did not return the admiration kasi ang gusto niya ay si Rizal. Tapos etong si Antonio Luna, dahil hindi binalik sa kanya yung pagmamahal na inialay niya kay Nelly Bausted, siniraan ba naman niya, sinabihan niya ng hindi maganda etong babae. Ikinagalit yun ni Rizal, not for himself, pero for the fact na why are you telling such negative comments to a lady just because she did not love you back. Ganun. So, challenge na into a duel itong si Antonio Luna. So, you see class here in our lessons or in our stories, pinapresent naman lahat ng patungkol kay Rizal. Rizal is also just a human. So, nakikipag-away din siya. Hindi puro kabanalan yung ipinakita ni Rizal habang siya ay nabubuhay. So, nakikipag-away din. Udyok ng isang pagiging tao lamang. Okay, so Rizal also dared to a duel Wenceslao Retana of the anti-Filipino newspaper La Epoca, who wrote that Rizal's family was not paying its land rent. Kung meron tayong La Solidaridad, meron din tayong La Epoca. Itong La Epoca na ito ay isang newspaper na anti-Filipino. Okay. At ang mga nagsusulat dito sa La Epoca na to, isa ay si Wenceslao Retana, na sinabi niya na yung pamilya daw ni Rizal ay hindi nagbabayad ng land rent. Kaya siguro daw ay ayun na palayas doon sa Calamba, which is totally a lie kasi na sabi na natin na well off yung family ni Rizal. And we were also exposed to inequalities and injustice at pagkakamkam na lupa na nangyayari, hindi lang actually sa Calamba, pero sa maraming parte ng Pilipinas sa panahon ng mga Espanyol. Okay, so both duels were fortunately aborted. Luna became Rizal's good friend again, while Retana even became Rizal's eventual first non-Filipino biographer. So, ironically, kahit nag-away itong mga ito, si Luna ay naging mabuting kaibigan ni Rizal, tapos si Retana naging biographer pa niya. So, si Retana na nagsulat ng mga maling bagay patungkol sa pamilya niya, ay naging biographer pa ni Rizal o sumulat ng buhay ni Rizal. In Madrid, Rizal also heard the news of Leonor Rivera's marriage to the Englishman Henry Keeping, who was the choice of Leonor's mother. As if misfortunes were not enough, there also emerged the Del Pilar-Rizal rivalry for leadership in the Asociación Hispano-Filipino. Okay, let's stop here because I'd like to make a point dito sa pagpapakasal ni Leonor Rivera kay Englishman Henry Keeping na choice ng kanyang nanay. Actually, may roon ding naging kasintahan si Rizal dati na yung tatay naman niya ay hindi pabor kay Rizal because as a father, and even this one, yung nanay ni Leonor, as a father and as a mother, they just try to protect themselves and protect their daughter first of all. So, pinoprotektahan lang naman nila yung kanilang anak at ang kanilang buong pamilya kasi alam nila na kapag ka ma-associate ka kay Rizal ay may panganib kang kakaharapin dahil mainit nga ang mga mata ng mga Espanyol dito kay Rizal. So, sa tingin ko ay normal lang naman sa isang magulang na protektahan ang kanyang anak at ang kanyang pamilya. Although, itong happening na ito ay heartbreak ni Rizal kasi minahal niya rin si Leonor Rivera. Okay, so, ang dami actually hindi magagandang nangyari bukod sa pakikipag-away niya kay Luna, kay Retana, tas yung nabalitaan niya nakasal na si Rivera, ano pa, naging magkatunggali sila ni Del Pilar sa pagiging leader or presidente ng isang samahan. So the supposedly healthy election for a leader responsible produced unpleasant split among the Filipinos in Madrid, the Rizalistas versus the Pilaristas. Rizal thus decided to leave Madrid, lest his presence results in more serious factions among Filipinos in Madrid. Ayan. Dahil nga hindi sila nagkasundo sa kung sino ang magiging kanilang pinuno, nagkaroon ng faction or division among the Filipino people. And imbis na magkaisa sila kasi isa lang naman ang mithiin nila na maipabatid sa mga Espanyol yung kanilang mga kahilingan, yung in-enumerate natin kanina, A, B, C, D, E, F. Isa doon yung pag-exempt sa mga Filipino sa forced labor. Ayun, nagkaroon ng faction or division, hindi sila gaanong naging matagumpay dahil dito. At nag-decide na lang si Rizal na umalis dahil kapag mananatili siya, iniisip niya na baka mas lalong magkawatak-watak ang mga Pilipino doon dahil nga may pumapanig sa kanya at may pumapanig kay Del Pilar. So umalis siya para mapilitan ang mga Pilipino na sumailalim na lang kay Del Pilar. Okay, so in Biarritz, Paris, and Brussels, Rizal proceeded to take a more than a month vacation in Biarritz, a tourist town in southwestern France noted for its mild climate and sand beaches. Arriving there in February 1891, Rizal was welcomed as a family guest in the house of Baustet, especially by Nelly, ayan, with whom he later had a serious but failed romantic relationship. Ang daming naling sa kanya na babae, tapos ang laging description sa dulo ay failed romantic relationship dahil sa isang napaka-importanting rason class na laging pinipili ng ating national hero na si Dr. Jose Rizal yung kanyang mission, yung kanyang pagmamahal sa bansa. In fact, yung doon sa mga naunang kwento, yung kay Osei-san, yung sa Japan, halos ayaw niya nang iwan ng Japan dahil napamahal siya doon sa kagandahan ng lugar, yung progressive country na Japan, at kay Osei-san na isang napakagandang dalaga, napakabait, pero mas pinili niya pa rin na umalis kasi meron siyang misyon na ginagawa. So, yun lagi yung naghihinder ng pakikipagrelasyon ni Rizal sa isang babae. Okay, so in Biarritz, he continued to work on his Elfili and completed its manuscript on March 29, the eve of his departure for Paris. Valentin Ventura, ito nang sinasabi ko sa inyo na napaka-importanting tao sa buhay ni Rizal dahil, ayan, mamaya ulit. Hindi pa tayo dumadating sa punto na yun. So, Valentin Ventura hosted his short stay in Paris, and the Jacobi, especially Petite Suzanne, cordially welcomed his arrival in Brussels in April 1891. In Brussels, Rizal revised and prepared for printing his second novel until the end of May. By June 1891, he was already looking for a printing firm to print the El Filibusterismo. So, natapos niya dito sa wakas yung kanyang nobela na El Filibusterismo. Naghahanap na siya ng printing press at publication. So in Gent, Rizal went to Gent in July 1891 because the cost of printing in the place was cheaper. Sa Gent daw ay may murang paprintan ng kanyang libro at publication na rin. So he lived in a low-cost boarding house where he had a roommate, Jose Alejandro, an engineering student in the University of Gent. Tightening their belts, they rented a room exclusive of breakfast. O, teka lang, balikan natin itong University of Gent class ha. Diba na-encounter natin ito kanina? Ito yung leading university pagdating sa engineering. Tapos si Edelberto, yung nakilala niya na estudyante na sinabihan niya na dito ka nararapat. Tapos yung estudyante na yun sumunod kay Rizal at nagtagumpay nga, nag-graduate with flying colors. So bumalik siya dito sa Gent class para i-publish yung kanyang libro. Tapos boarding house ulit at ang nakilala niya ay si Jose Alejandro. Okay, so tipid na tipid siya. He is already running out of budget. Nag-decide silang dalawa ng kanyang roommate na si Jose Alejandro na bumili ng isang kahon ng biskwit at na magsisilbing almusal nila sa araw-araw for a month. Pero itong si Jose Alejandro, 15 days pa lamang ay ubos na niya yung kanyang parte, yung kanyang hati. makikita natin kung anong klaseng tao, anong klaseng lalaki si Rizal class. Kahit sa mga simpleng bagay na ito. Kasi in comparison to Jose Alejandro na ubos na niya yung kanyang parte sa 15 days lamang. So, for example, dapat ang kakainin nila sa isang araw ay 2 biskwit lamang para tumagal hanggang 1 buwan. Breakfast lang naman ito. Ay ang kinakain ni Jose Alejandro ay 4. So, naubos na niya in 15 days pa lamang sa kanya, habang si Rizal ay tumupad sa kanyang daily allocation. At tumagal nga ng 1 buwan yung kanyang biskwit. Makikita mo class kung anong klaseng tao, lalaki si Rizal, very disciplined. Okay, so the publisher F. Mayer Van Loo Press, number 66 Vianderen Street, agreed to print the Elfili on an installment basis. Despite pawning out his jewels and living tight-fistedly, Rizal ran out of funds. So kahit anong pagtitipid niya, kinulang pa rin siya, and the printing had to be suspended on August 6. But through Valentin Ventura's salvific act, the El Filibusterismo came off the press on September 18, 1891, 2 weeks after he visited Paris for the last time to bid goodbye to his friends and compatriots. Ito yung class yung naging role ni Valentin Ventura. So, kumulang yung pera ni Rizal sa pagpapublish ng kanyang libro, at si Valentin Ventura ang naging daan para matuloy pa rin yung publication. Siya yung nagpuno ng kakulangan. Doon sa libro, when we studied this, na-mention doon kung how much exactly was the kulang na pinuno ni Valentin Ventura. So, I have to look for that and then inform you how much. Okay, so umalis na siya doon after niya ma-publish. Let's now go in Hong Kong and Sandakan. Okay, so in October 1891, Rizal left Europe for Hong Kong on board the ship Melbourne, on which he began writing his third but unfinished novel. Hindi niya na natapos itong kanyang pangatlong nobela. He arrived in Hong Kong on November 20 and resided at number 5 de Aguilar Street, number 2 Rednaxila Terrace. In case you did not notice, itong Rednaxila dito ay Alexander spelled reversely. Having escaped the friars' persecution, Don Francisco Paciano and Silvestre Ubaldo, Jose's brother-in-law, also arrived in Hong Kong. O grabe ito, persecute na ng mga friar o ng mga Espanyol yung pamilya ni Rizal. Tatay niya, si Don Francisco Paciano at Silvestre, pero nagawa nilang makatakas at nakapunta silang Hong Kong. Shortly after, Doña Teodora and children Lucia, Josefa, and Trinidad also arrived. Sinundan sila ng nanay ni Rizal na si Doña Teodora, mga kapatid niya na si Lucia, Josefa, at Trinidad. So, nagkaroon sila ng isang family reunion dito sa Hong Kong. Sana hindi na sila umalis dyan, na buhay na lang at hindi na ulit bumalik sa Pilipinas para naiwasan yung pagpatay kay Rizal. Pero hindi. Things happen for a reason, kasi kung hindi naman namumulat ang mga Pilipino at hindi sila lalaban sa mga Espanyol kung hindi na natunghayan itong kabayanihan ng ating national hero na si Dr. Jose Rizal. Okay, so in Hong Kong, Jose opened a medical clinic. A Portuguese friend, Dr. Lorenzo P. Marquez, helped him to get many patrons of various nationalities. His successful operation on his mother's left eye allowed her to read again. Okay, dito sa Hong Kong, nagtayo siya ng isang medical clinic. Tapos yung kaibigan niya na si Dr. Lorenzo, tinulungan siya na magkaroon ng mga customers. Kung maalala ninyo, nanay niya ang naging inspirasyon niya sa pagkuha niya ng medicine, sa pagkuha niya ng degree na ito para magkaroon siya ng lisensya para maoperahan yung kanyang nanay. At nung nakamit niya lahat ito, totoo nga na naoperahan yung nanay niya at nanumbalik yung magandang paningin ng nanay niya na si Doña Teodora. Okay, next. In March 1892, he went to Sandakan, East Malaysia aboard Menon, to negotiate with British authorities concerning the founding of a Filipino colony in North Borneo, now called Sabah. On March 21, Rizal asked Governor General Eulogio Despujol through a letter to allow the landless Filipinos, especially the deported Calamba tenants, to establish themselves in North Borneo. Okay, Rizal was back in Hong Kong in April 1892. Yung sinasabi dito, class, kung maalala niyo kanina, yung mga Calamba tenants ay pinalayas ng mga friars. So sila ay landless na, wala na silang tirahan, at ipinapakiusap ni Rizal kay Governor General Eulogio Despujol na kung pwede ay doon na sila manirahan sa North Borneo, establish themselves in North Borneo. Yung Sabang ngayon class, itong now called Sabah, ito yung North Borneo noon. Okay. Let's see or let's find out kung pinayagan ba yung kanyang request. So, wanting to confer with Despujol concerning his North Borneo colonization project, Rizal left Hong Kong on June 21, 1892 along with his sister Lucia. Without his knowledge, the Spanish consul in Hong Kong sent a cablegram to Despujol stating figuratively that the rat is in the trap. Ito ay actually, class, bitag na kay Rizal. And inform na nila itong si Despujol na pabalik na ng Pilipinas si Dr. Jose Rizal. Actually, the next module after this higher education and life abroad ni Dr. Jose Rizal, ang next dito ay yung kanyang trial and execution. So, exciting part yun. Doon na tayo ma-heartbroken lahat kung paano siya mahuli dahil trinidor siya nitong Spanish consul na ito. Tingnan nyo, sinabi pa, the rat is in the trap. And then, consequently, after niyang mahuli, pinatawan din siya ng kamatayan dahil nga doon sa kanyang nobela na naipublish. Okay, a secret case against Rizal was thus filed in Manila for an anti-religious and anti-patriotic public campaign. So, ano ang pinanghugutan ng anti-religious at anti-patriotic na to? Yung dalawang nobela niya kasi class patungkol ito sa pagsisiwalat niya ng mga kasamaan ng mga Espanyol, even the church, diba? Yung kanilang partiality at yung kademonyuhan ng simbahan, collecting buwis, collecting money, pagkamkam ng lupain, pagre-rape ng mga babae, okay, pag friars owning haciendas and friars running the school. Okay. So Rizal and his sister arrived in Manila at noon on June 26, 1892. At 7 p.m., he was able to confer in Malacanang with Despujol, who agreed to pardon his father and told him to return on June 29. So, pinayagan ni Despujol na ipardon yung tatay ni Rizal at sinabihan na bumalik sa Pilipinas in June 29. He then visited his sisters and friends in Manila. On June 27, he took a train and visited his friends in Central Luzon. He had a stopover at the Bautista Mansion in Malolos, Bulacan, and spent the night in the house of Evaristo Puno in Tarlac. Okay, about 30 kilometers away from the residence of Leonor Rivera, keeping in Camiling. He also went to San Fernando and Bacolor, Pampanga, and returned to Manila on June 28 at 5 p.m. Okay, on June 29, 30, and July 3, he had other interviews with Despujol. Rizal's colonization project was rejected, but his request to lift the exile of his sisters was granted. So, yung request niya na mag-establish ng kanilang tirahan ang mga landless na Kalamba tenants doon sa North Borneo, hindi yun ipinayagan, pero napawalang bisa yung exile ng kanyang mga kapatid. So, nilift na, ibig sabihin, pwede na ulit silang bumalik na ang Pilipinas. So, on the evening of July 3, Rizal spearheaded the meeting in the house of Doroteo Ongcuanco on Elias Street, Tondo, Manila, attended by at least 20 Filipinos, including Nueva Andres Bonifacio, Apolinario Mabini. Rizal explained the aims of the civic association La Liga Filipina. Officers were then elected, having Ambrosio Salvador as the president, thereby officially establishing the league. Just 3 days after the meeting, though, Rizal was arrested. Ito na yun. Sinampan siya ng kaso, diba, tinawag nung Spanish consul kay Despujol na pabalik na ng Pilipinas si Rizal, ihanda na ang mga dapat ihanda para makapture na siya. So, just 3 days after the meeting, though, Rizal was arrested during his interview with the Governor General Despujol. Okay, showed him anti-friar leaflets, pobres frails or poor friars allegedly discovered in his sister Lucia's pillowcases. Kung ngayon may tanim bala, noon may tanim pamphlet. Ayan, sa pillowcase daw ng kanyang sister. Pero actually, ang totoong ikinagalit nila ay yung pag-form ni Rizal ng mga grupo at yung pagiging membro niya ng propaganda movement at yung pagsulat niya ng kanyang dalawang nobela at yung pag-publish nun. So, nabasa na, naliliberate na, natatauhan na ang mga tao sa kung gaano kademonyo, kung anong mga maling ginagawa ng mga Espanyol laban sa mga Pilipino. Dito sa sarili nating bayan. So, imprisoned in Fort Santiago for almost 10 days, Rizal was brought at 12:30 a.m. of July 14 to the steamer Cebu. Passing through Mindoro and Panay, the vessel docked at Captain at Dapitan in Zamboanga del Norte on the evening of July 17. So, dito siya in exile sa Dapitan, which is a truly scenic place with fine beaches, napakaganda. For sure, a soothing place for a balikbayan like Rizal. Balikbayan nga, nagbabalik na ng Pilipinas. Pero, hindi naman siya pumunta sa Dapitan bilang isang tourist or a vacationer, pero isang political exile. So, nakakalungkot. The ship captain Delgras handed him over to the local Spanish commandant Ricardo Carnicero, and that event signaled the start of Rizal's life as a deportee in Dapitan. Okay, so ito na, na-capture na siya dahil sa pagtatraidor ng Spanish consul. The rat is in the trap, ang sinabi niya. And in the next module, we will discuss his trial and execution. Yung trial niya, parang wala yun kasi determined ang mga Espanyol na patawan siya ng kamatayan dahil doon sa kanyang pagsisiwalat ng kanilang kasamaan. So that is it for this discussion. Next time, we will already be proceeding with Chapter 5, Rizal's Trial and Execution.